All right, guys, we're here for one more episode. It looks like we're pretty much on a roll for the new year. What do we got on the docket?
You know, Jerry, thanks. We've got Hugi Hilmisson from SleepImage. For our listeners that aren't familiar with SleepImage, it's a ring. It's a home sleep apnea test that uses a ring rather than any kind of belt or finger probe or anything like that. So a little bit different. Hugi is got an economics background. We'll learn a little bit about him as we talk to him today, but he is from Iceland, so we'll probably have a little bit of accent come through, and our listeners might have to listen a little bit different. But fantastic guy. I'm looking forward to what he has to share with us on the SleepImage product.
Sounds cool. It sounds very interesting, especially because you said he has an economics background. That's always interesting.
Look at that. Look at that.
Yep, I got one of the rings. So
it's got
for anybody who's
some
viewing it on YouTube, you'll be able to see you'll be able to see the actual ring.
There you go.
Yep.
There you go.
Very nice.
And you can also see Robert doing one of these little numbers with his fingers as well. So I thought it was for a second, but anyway.
Thanks, Jerry. Hey, you guys know that this is a topic that I wanted and for us to be able to cover, because PPG technology is not I guess it's not widely understood as to how it's able to take what looks like an oximeter and extrapolate enough data to be able to truly diagnose a patient with sleep apnea. So it'll be interesting to hear his take on what that looks like, and maybe we can even at some point bring on another company that has PAT technology, so they can explain that a little bit, so maybe we can understand some of the differences. Not necessarily to say one's better versus the other, because I don't think that's our place to necessarily advocate one over the other, but just to make sure that our listening audience understands the differences between the two.
Yeah, I hear you. I was going through the article. I didn't get to finish reading it, oddly enough, today from Sleep Review magazine, which was talking about going beyond AHI to diagnose obstructive sleep apnea. So it's interesting that we're going to be having that conversation today with Hugi about the product that's going beyond that. So looking forward to it. So you guys ready to
Absolutely
for the show?
Yep.
Right. All right then.
Like that.
Welcome everyone once again to another fantastic episode of SleepTech Talk, the sleep podcast, with your hosts and friends, Emerson Kerr, Robert Miller, and me, Dr. Gerald George Moneycarode, here with another fantastic and fabulous episodes for all you folks out there. And we can't thank you enough for all that you're doing for us, your support. Please continue to hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe. We are on YouTube and all podcast platforms, so be sure to spread the love with everybody out there. With that being said, hey, Emerson, who do we have today on the show?
A special guest, Hugi Hilmisson, with SleepImage. And let me tell you a little bit about SleepImage for our folks that have no idea who that is. Long history in the sleep diagnostic medical device industry. Was originally a spinoff from Embla Systems, which developed traditional PSG and home sleep apnea test devices, with notable products such as Embletta MPR and the RemLogic software. The SleepImage system was the first FDA-cleared in 2009 and was later cleared as a software as a medical device SAMD in 2017. And most recently in 2019, it was cleared as a system for diagnosing sleep disordered breathing, in addition to the core sleep analysis and the FDA-cleared measure of sleep quality with the Sleep Quality Index. So Hugi, let me tell you just a little bit about him, and then we'll let him expand on this. Has been working in the sleep field, in the research side, and in the development of SleepImage System for the last 8 years. Has collaborated with multiple teams of researchers, assisting them in research using cardiopulmonary coupling. And we'll hear a little bit more about that today, I hope. And other analytics provided by the SleepImage System, publishing papers, over 10 papers over these many years. So Huey, thanks for joining us. As we kind of talked about in our little pre-talk at the beginning, we'd love to hear the story of how you got here. None of us have really kind of planned on being involved in sleep medicine. We kind of stumbled backwards into it. How in the world did you get here into sleep and to be a part of such a fascinating topic?
Well, thank you everyone for the introduction and the opportunity to be here. Well, I was certainly not like maybe so many others, it wasn't really my plan to get into sleep medicine. My background's in economics, the educational background, and I started part-time with SleepImage sometime back in late 2014 or sometime in 2015, primarily doing some statistical tasks. Help company out and researchers who were using the SleepImage system at the time. And then just sort of gradually became almost sort of a self-taught software engineer, although I don't like to claim I'm self-taught since I've been relying on others at the company to answer all my dumb questions for the past 8 years. So not entirely self-taught, but that's just sort of how I sort of gradually got into this, just having a fairly robust background in statistics. And that's how I got into the research. And you can't really do much nowadays without knowing how to write computer code. So that's the short story.
Well, that's pretty lucky. I mean, for you to have the is extraordinary. I mean, as you began to look at marrying these two together and is going that direction, and you look at the market opportunity for home sleep apnea testing, what were you thinking in those beginning days as you guys were developing this software and you're seeing this market? What did you envision happening with the home sleep apnea market?
Well, especially since you mentioned home sleep apnea, we felt pretty early on that the sleep part of the home sleep testing was being neglected a little bit. It was, very heavy focus on the respiratory part of the measurement, not of course during PSG. They've got all the signals and analytics covered all the way down to the sleep part. But for the home sleep apnea testing, it was quite heavy respiratory focus. Not to say that that's not important, but the sleep part and the sleep quality part we found was lacking. And we felt that the solution was, a practical, non-invasive, scalable technology that would actually have the potential to be, economical enough to hopefully one day being able to test each and every patient, however often they themselves or their treating physician feels that they should be tested. We sleep 365 days a year, probably, hopefully most of us. And, measuring once in a person's lifetime, or even if it's once a year, it doesn't really give a comprehensive view of someone's sleep habits or sleep quality.
To bring it to the market like you did, I mean, it's such a consumer focused product. That's a leap forward when we think about home testing, because when you began that process, it was still very much siloed into a very specific, part of sleep medicine. It was very forward thinking. What made you think that putting it more in a consumer model like you have, or design, would be the future of sleep? Because that's not where people were thinking when you began that process.
Right. So other devices we feel, have their, pros and cons. Looking at the cons, the economics often get in the way. But there is also, that part I'm sure every physician struggles on a daily basis, just convincing people that they need to get tested. They're not always, the patients are not always too keen on, taking time out of their day, attaching a bunch of leads and electrodes and belts and, sleeping with a brick on their chest. Although those, bricks might be less common nowadays. But then there's also, the way you sell the product. And we've really been trying to employ sort of a volume-based model that is, pretty aggressive in rewarding those that test in higher volumes with lower prices per unit. And, as software as a medical device, that was done quite deliberately by us, because the core technology of the SleepImage system, cardiopulmonary coupling, is signal agnostic to an extent. It requires, at least today, either a photoplethysmogram or an electrocardiogram. And, it doesn't really matter which device it comes from, as long as it's a good quality signal and meets our technical requirements. And so that allows us to, not be too confined to a specific piece of hardware and react fast when technological advancements in the hardware space become available to the market.
All right, Huey, I got to get to the question that I've been wanting to ask when I knew that you were going to be on with us.
That's Robert's superpower, by the way, asking all these crazy questions. So
that is true. That's my role here, is to divert the topic away into exactly what I want to hear, I guess. So Huey, the question that I have for you, because I think it's something that's important for sort of sleep tech in general to understand, is the technology. What the traditional equipment and channels that we're accustomed to include a thermistor or a nasal oral cannula and an oximeter in order to be able to gather the different physiological data that we're looking to get with a home sleep testing device. Can you talk a little bit about PPG and how the again, high level, remember you're talking to sleep techs here who are part of our audience, but help them to understand how this ring device is able to extrapolate enough information to be able to diagnose a patient with sleep apnea.
Right. So in the photoplethysmogram, which is usually delivered by PPG sensors in general, or at least they should have the capability of delivering it, there's quite a bit of information embedded in that signal. Most everyone is familiar with how you derive the pulse rate. You basically pick a feature on the pulse waveform on each pulse that you actually want to mark, and then you do that as consistently as you can from pulse to pulse. And eventually you have basically an array of points in time so you can calculate the pulse rate. But what is perhaps less commonly done is deriving the respiration from that signal. Just from a high level, there are, at least the way I see it, 3 ways of deriving the respiratory component from the signal. There's the baseline wonder, there is the frequency modulation, and the amplitude modulation. And those familiar with research, diving into that topic, know that there are also various ways of combining those 3 main metrics. And that sort of gets us to, answering the question why CPC, or cardiopulmonary coupling, exists at all. Years ago, before, the first paper on CPC was published, there had been a fair bit of research done in, investigating the efficacy of heart rate variability and deriving these respiratory traces from electrocardiograms or photoplethysmograms. But as standalone measures, at least some researchers found that they were lacking. some patient populations just lack heart rate variability in general. Think patient populations such as those with cardiac issues like congestive heart failure is a good example. And what CPC is trying to accomplish is to assess the autonomic nervous system activity. And during sleep, that is what gives us an indication of what state the patient is in. And so that was kind of the issue with heart rate variability. If you have none, there's not really much to differentiate. You can't get a sleep architecture from it. In comes derived respiration, but as a standalone signal, it proved not to be perhaps too beneficial, at least not for sleep staging. At least early on, it was thought of as being maybe a little too noisy to make any specific assessments on it. In comes CPC, where the goal is to couple these two data streams, heart rate variability and respiration in the frequency domain. And that, to put it bluntly in short, just gives you a higher certainty. If there is coherence and cross-spectral power between the two, basically meaning, are they in sync or are they out of sync? And that gives us what I think is a pretty robust measure of what is happening in the autonomic nervous system, because that's what we are doing in the SleepImage system is, measuring sleep through the hypothalamus as opposed to the cerebral cortex. So two methods of getting to the same end.
Very good. Now, as far as consumer technology, you know that the Apple Watch and some of the other consumer products that are out there probably utilize some similar technology, although maybe not quite as advanced, I would assume. But can you speak to that at all?
Well, that tends to be, in the past has been perhaps the primary criticism of consumer technologies is that they're not well documented. The manufacturers have been keeping, the core methodologies close to their chest. They're not really describing in detail what they're doing. And as we all know, in the field of medicine, that's a bit of a no-no. And that's another strength of the SleepImage system. While, there are certainly people out there that have probably not heard of us, or maybe not even heard of cardiopulmonary coupling, but the first paper was published in 2005. And to this date, at least over 100 publications on the topic of CPC and other technologies employed by the SleepImage system. So there's quite a lot of information out there. So even for, physicians or sleep techs that are, new to SleepImage and cardiopulmonary coupling, the information is out there in the peer-reviewed publications. And that's kind of what sets us apart quite a bit from any consumer technology, even though we may have the convenience of the consumer technology.
Huey, I think what you said a moment ago is so poignant because, we have so many of our listeners are sleep coaches or they do sleep education, and they're constantly running up against someone's watch or their ring or something that they have. It's not your ring, it's someone else's. And, to your point, I think what's interesting in what you said is that, how they derive the information isn't known. And I think that's a great learning, from our conversation today, is that as our sleep techs, sleep coaches, sleep educators are talking to their patients, the difference between that watch on the wrist and what they would have gotten in a legitimate, home sleep apnea testing scenario is night and day. What's being used has been published, has been peer reviewed, has been scrutinized, to the nth degree. So I think that's really, really insightful. One of the things that we do see, or I see often, is heart rate variability. Again, our audience, some of these guys are on their way to work right now listening to us. Can you give us sort of that same high level description of what is heart rate variability and why does it matter? Because I love how you brought out the heart failure as a key part of that. But in a patient, if someone's looking at that, or they're trying to talk to their client, their patient, about heart rate variability, how can they break that down for them and put it in simple terms to understand its value in a test?
So it sort of depends what you're doing with the heart rate variability. The SleepImage system does not seek to calculate any of the commonly used HRV stats that you may see in HRV reports. So, as far as I know, the common ones are the NN50 or the RMSSD as an example, and they're supposed to give you an indication of your, overall level of health. The SleepImage system does something quite different. It's not really trying to arrive at a single number with heart rate variability. It is using the heart rate variability trace and analyzing it in the frequency domain. And like I mentioned before, most importantly, coupling it with the respiratory trace to get, that extra level of certainty to be actually able to say with that certainty, is that person in stable non-REM sleep or unstable non-REM sleep? Or is it more likely to be REM sleep or wake?
That's insightful, because I think what you're really pointing out is the necessity of having multiple measures, because it's really easy for someone to dial in on one measuring type and say, well, this is conclusive about your sleep disordered breathing or some aspect of your sleep disorder, when in fact, all of those measures paint a picture together, and they're sort of a check and balance in some ways, that this is the sort of event you're having, or this is a diagnosis that we're shooting for. I really appreciate how you're bringing that back together to point that out. What have been some of the surprises, as you guys have looked at your research and you've been able to push ahead with this model? What have been some really unique surprises, some insights about patients that your technology brought to light?
I would probably say that we've gotten some insight into, intranight variability, which was probably not well known in the past. I think that is changing quite a bit now, and we're seeing, just looking at our customers and, even researchers that I collaborate with, there's a growing interest in not necessarily just cranking up the N of the sample size, but actually measuring each subject more than just once or twice. So I think that, at the end of the day, in 10 years' time, I think that will probably end up being the biggest contribution, is allowing the field of sleep medicine to measure each individual more often and get a sort of a better idea of sleep through time rather than as just a point in time. And, in addition to that, I think with our focus on sleep quality, which has been, one of our primary things to look at, sleep quality was a term that was thrown around, a lot for a while. And, a lot of researchers even started to get irritated by it because everyone was throwing around the term, sleep quality without a clear definition. We think that, at least for our purposes, we defined it in such a way that, starting with the fact that we're assessing autonomic nervous system activity during sleep, there are certain states, as indicated by the autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic dominance, being the primary desirable state. If you have a robust measure of that and you're measuring that during sleep, then you're measuring health during sleep. And, thereby you can deduce that that is sleep quality. We think that health during sleep and sleep quality are one and the same in a sense. So it just comes down to how robust your measure of sleep health is, or your health during sleep.
Well, Huey, sincerely appreciate you joining us. We are out of time, and it was fascinating to hear the technical side of the product, and wanted to actually delve even further into sleep quality index. That would have been even more interesting to continue the conversation, but we are out of time. Where could we get more, if the audience is interested, where could they go to get more information?
Well, sleepimage.com is a good start. listeners should be able to find every bit of documentation, if not on the homepage, then in the science tab on our website, where we have, I'd like to think, almost all of the publications linked in there. If not, then feel free to contact us at sales@sleepimage.com, and we'll be happy to provide more information.
Well, thank you so much, Huey. Appreciate you joining us and appreciate the information. And the rest of the folks out there listening, we thank you so much for joining us once again for another episode. Continue to give us the likes. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And most importantly, share it with your friends. We can't thank you enough for all your support. With that, we say thank you. And until next time, lights on. All right, Postcals. I'm back on camera, by the way. Sorry about that. For those of you who are on YouTube and those of you who are listening, need to go onto YouTube because you would have missed me for a good chunk of it. Me and my pretty face. Unfortunately, I had some internet issues, and hopefully whatever's recorded came out from the audio as well as possible.
Our viewers are traumatized.
Yeah.
I think they got a blessing this time that they didn't get to see that much.
They just need to go to your Facebook page and see your GQ post.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I got to do one of these numbers.
That's right. That's right.
So what do you guys think, Postcal?
No, I thought it was great. I mean, we gave Huey a tough task. Talking about, cardiopulmonary coupling is not the most exciting thing in the world, but our listeners really need to have an understanding of it. And I think he did a fantastic job breaking it down for us, and without getting too deeply into the weeds, because that's definitely something that you could get lost in easily. And it's fascinating technology. It gives our patients and our listeners, our colleagues, something else to treat or diagnose patients with. It's easy, and it's definitely an easy button for patients. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to Huey break it down for us.
What I found fascinating was that this guy, economics background, he was talking like a total electronics geek. It was crazy.
Oh, wow, I know.
Geek like that. I was like, holy crap, man, I would have never said that this guy was a data analyst kind of guy, which is what he said he was initially hired for. So to me, that was fascinating to hear that.
Well, I'm just completely frustrated. We keep having all of these guests that make me feel like I'm not so smart.
Right.
When I hear them talk like that, I feel like I have a place in this world that allows people to feel smarter than me. So
absolutely.
Hey, we just got to be happy that we can sell stuff.
Yes.
No, right. We're just not all lucky to be blessed with the good looks like Jerry. I think
yeah.
I was just getting ready to say that, Emerson. Thanks for.
But I am glad we had this on today, and I really, it's like we were talking about in the pre-cal. There's so much to learn from these different companies, and SleepImage is definitely cutting edge. To think about how forward thinking they were so many years ago, to be thinking of how they could bring something so unique to market. I mean, that's some crystal ball work. That's tough to do when you're in product development.
Oh, without a doubt, to be able to foresee what the market's going to be several years from now and say that, hey, this is what's going to happen. But hey, we were talking about this in another episode with the advent of COVID. There's been a lot of need for change, a lot of need for newer technologies. So though it wasn't planned for COVID, I would say this is definitely something that was really good and timely for the market at the same time. And we were talking about these articles that are coming out, and he referenced so many studies out there for measuring and diagnosing obstructive sleep apnea from these kind of technologies. I just think it's the direction that we need to go as an industry. How do we get smaller? How do we get better? How do we get more efficient? Utilizing the data that we can capture with all sorts of things.
And then how do we help our SleepTech friends adjust to that? harness it, not see it as an enemy, but as a friend.
Right.
And then become the educator and coach and leader to lead these people to better health. I think that's an important part of this.
You make a really good point, because you still need people to administer the tests, be able
People take care of people.
Exactly. And without that, it won't continue, and the industry won't continue either. People still need to take care of people.
I know that their device is currently used as a home sleep testing device, where it's going to be a night or two of information that you're able to obtain in order to get to a diagnosis. But think about the long-term ramifications of looking at sleep health on the sort of a longitudinal perspective. Thinking about a patient, not just today or tomorrow, and maybe they sleep on their side tonight, they sleep on their back tomorrow, and so forth. But because he talked a little bit about the night-to-night variability that they see
Right.
in patients. But think about, this is a potential long-term opportunity for us to be able to look at a patient's sleep on a night-to-night basis. And as a sleep coach, what great information would it be if you had sleep time and oximetry data, to be able to work with a patient. I mean, obviously, if they're on CPAP, you've got adherence data, but couple that with some of these other parameters that is able to be obtained through this type of technology. To me, that's the play. It's the hey, this is today to be what we use to diagnose, but tomorrow and going forward, it's a long-term tool to really truly change a patient's sleep by virtue of the ability to remotely collect data.
But it's that, plus it's I loved how we talked about a validated tool, because so many people spend so much money on, and us included, on gadgets to monitor their sleep. But something he pointed out that I thought was so poignant was that here we've got a technology that's been peer reviewed, it's validated. The technology is not held close to the vest like some of them are. And I think that's such an important part of our sleep techs and coaches explaining to the patient why a legitimate test with sleep professionals is so important for their care. That the other things are nice tools for looking at trends and giving us clues, but they're not conclusive when it comes to diagnosing and treating, and to your point, creating that longitudinal approach to care that helps us understand what are those changes over time that legitimately are being surfaced, and how can a physician and a sleep technologist work together to better treat those patients. It's such keen insights.
I really wanted to explore that further when he spoke about that this is a snapshot of 365 days. Hopefully we sleep all 365.
Yeah.
But with that being said, and to Robert's point, this is where you'll see more roles of the sleep tech and being that sleep coach to be able to quantify and translate that information, that data to the patient. But where does it go even further? It'll be fascinating to see in the future how we take this information and how we'll be able to transform lives. Because if you look at it right now, in another episode, we were talking with one of the guests how the CPAP, for example, it's just 50% compliance on it. And we typically look at 30 days, 90 days or whatever. And after that, it just kind of drops off and you have the 50% compliance. Would we be able to use a tool like this in order to make sure that the patient continue to be compliant for years on end, or forgets obstructive sleep apnea? There's so many other sleep disorders out there. Could we use this data for that sort of thing and have our sleep coaches step in and guide these patients through whether they need? That's where I find fascinating, is the future of what is.
Absolutely. That's good stuff.
Yeah, I think I sounded a little too intelligent there. Sorry.
Very, very. Thanks for the sermon. We'll take up an offering at the end.
Yeah, out of character for me. That too, being religious is not. I'm more on the evil side. So
yeah, whatever.
Well, with that being said, folks, thank you all so much for listening to us. Yammer on. look forward to you joining us in the next several episodes. We've got lots of fun guests, lots of very interesting guests. Up until next time, cheers. See you on the next one.